The one and only Henry Barbour, GOP strategist. Good morning, Henry. Thank you. And thank you for coming in, sir. It's good to have you.
Thank you, Paul. Always a pleasure to be here with you.
I think I'm going to get Chat GBT after that conversation with Ricky. Man, lots to talk about. Let me ask you this, and just to be inquisitive. Do you know, we're versed with David Ignatius from the Washington Post, or did you ever follow him, or
no?
See, no. We're just so far removed from that.
I know of him, but I don't know him. Wouldn't know him if he walked in the room.
Yeah, I wouldn't either. But apparently, him and his father before him, and this is again, if folks missed it the last hour, all the buzz yesterday was over him in Washington D.C. And you, me, and a lot of other folks, certainly in this audience, went, "Who the hell is this guy?"
Ignatius, to me, seems like an intelligence operative.
I agree.
So Ignatius was the one that got the Flynn leak that bounced Flynn. Yep. Ignatius is the guy that said Chris Steele's a truth teller. He's the guy that said the laptop was Russia disinformation. When American intelligence wants to get something out, they feed it to Ignatius. So the fact that the American intelligence community wants him to say this and is nudging Joe Biden out of the picture tells me they're worried about the impeachment hearing. Because in the impeachment, all of the evidence is going to come out. The American intelligence community is compromised by the Biden corruption. They don't want offshores. They don't want the Ukraine bribe spotlighted. There's a lot out there they need to contain. And it's not like he even said he wanted Kamala. He's like, get the whole ticket gone.
So it was just hearing, like, where is this guy? Is he behind the curtain at the Wizard of Oz? Or where is he? But again, now we know that he's probably the go-to person from the deep state when they wanted to leak something.
Well, apparently, I don't know much about David Ignatius other than I recognize his name, but couldn't have told you who he worked for. Yeah. I'm glad to say I talked to plenty of reporters, but I've never talked to him, and of course I don't really have any information for him for the kind of stuff he reports.
Let me ask you this, and a question I asked this morning was: is it better to leave Joe Biden in there, regardless who the Republican nominee happens to be, or to that he steps aside and somebody else fills that? In there, I got to believe if there are forces, and I'm just opining here, if there are forces who will make sure that he is not the nominee, I got to believe that those same forces are going to be strong enough to suggest that Kamala Harris doesn't run. Your thoughts on that?
Well, number one, I mean, the country can't stand 4 more years of Joe Biden. Mm-hmm. And if we can't stand 4 more years of Joe Biden, we sure can't stand 4 years of Kamala Harris. So, Republicans, our task is we need to nominate a forward-looking candidate who can win and take back the White House and get the country back on track. That's our job, and we can't control what the Democrats are going to do. Mm-hmm. I have always thought, Paul, that Joe Biden would be the nominee again. There are plenty of people who think that for various reasons, health or whatever, that he won't. But I've always thought that the powers that be in the White House would make certain that they keep their power, and Joe Biden is their ticket. So that's the way I see it. But he's so unpopular with the masses in the country, and he has such a poor record that I think if any legitimate Democrat jumped in, Katie barred the door, and I think all of them may jump in, and then Biden will have a really competitive Democrat primary, and he might be done.
You think one of the reasons JFK Jr. hasn't caught fire more so than he has is because it is actually the Democrat Party and the deep state or whatever it happens to be, and media also on board with this, are suppressing him?
No, I just don't think
he's not that attractive to the people.
He's not that attractive to Democrat voters. Yeah. He's off on a lot of conspiracy stuff that I think is not necessarily what voters are looking for. But Yeah.
Well, but a Joe Manchin type guy is not going to work. I mean, they've gone so far that that's not palatable to them.
Well, yeah.
To them.
But no, Joe Manchin could not win Democrat primary. He wouldn't have a prayer. It would be some liberal mayor who, shut down their town during COVID. That's what we would be looking at.
Or governor.
Gavin Newsom,
Yeah.
somebody like that, the governor of California, who is a left-winger. But that's where the Democrat Party is. They've left where, I think the majority of Americans think and want, a safe community and, good paying jobs. And, they have such a cultural agenda to move to the left, that people call woke. And it just doesn't resonate. It's why, Glenn Youngkin is governor in a blue state like Virginia is because.
You mentioned him the last time you were on. Is that a client or something, or?
I wish he was.
Because we got to learn a hell of a lot more about Governor Youngkin before for the people of Mississippi to even take note of him.
Yeah, well, right now, people in Mississippi don't need to worry about him. He's focused on Virginia, and I don't think there is a 1%, 2% chance that he'll end up running for president.
Is DeSantis gone?
DeSantis is struggling, and DeSantis it's tough, Paul, when you lose your momentum, and his momentum, frankly, was before he ever even got in the race. I mean, he kind of maxed out about March, and he's kind of gone down since he got in the race. Honestly, right now, I think Nikki Haley looks the strongest of the 8 or so challengers to Trump. But the thing that has to happen, if any of them are to defeat Trump in the primary, and I will say openly, I'm glad what Donald Trump did as president, but I don't want him to be president again. I don't want him to be our nominee.
No. Why is that?
Well, number one, I think he's backward looking. I think he's still so caught up in 2020. And I also don't think that he'll win. And I also
hang on.
Yes, sir.
That's an opinion. But if he's backward looking, regardless of all of that, how does that affect policy if his policy mirrors what he did the first time?
Well, if you're
even if he's got a chip on his shoulder, See, here's my problem. I think you probably have at least if it's 75, 80 million people out there who disagree with you, and they're being just put off in a corner somewhere. The establishment really wants somebody else. We don't want you. What about those 81 million people, 80 million people? If Joe Biden got 81 million, then let's just say Trump got 75 million. And I believe probably more so than that now. Are they just to be shunned?
No. And let me tell you, in 2016, in the primary, we had 17 candidates, and Donald Trump was number 17 for me. But when May rolled around and it was obvious that he had the votes, I was for Trump. And I worked hard for Trump, and including at the Republican Convention and the Rules Committee when the Cruz people tried to take the nomination away from him. And so I defended Trump because he won. He was the choice of the voters. And the reality is, Paul, if there are 70 million Americans and I'm like one person who doesn't want Trump and they all want Trump, well, guess what? They're going to win. Yeah. Because we have primaries. Votes matter. And that's what, at the end of the day, is going to decide.
I agree. We've got a break coming up here. I want to turn our attention to the state race and Brandon Presley and the governor's race, which has really gotten down in the mud. And I don't think we've seen it's a lot deeper mud to be had coming up before we get to November. We'll talk more about that with Henry Barbour, GOP strategist, coming up with Henry Barbour. And let's change our conversation to the state Are you surprised by some of the advertising and some of the things coming from the left?
No, sir. No. And there's a reason, Paul.
Yeah.
But Brandon Presley can't run on the issues, and he's going to have a very difficult time running against Tate Reeves' record. You know, whether you like or dislike Tate Reeves' style, he has a fabulous record. If you look at, and I have some of this written down because I want to make sure I got it right, but education, Paul, 10 years ago we were ranked 49th. Now we're 21st. Our fourth graders' reading and math gains lead the nation and have for several years. Graduation rates are at the highest level they've ever been and higher than the majority of other states. Our African-American students' achievements are in the top 5 nationally. And we're talking about Mississippi. And Mississippi, prior to Tate, was averaging about $900 million a year in new capital investment. In 22 alone, under Tate Reeves' leadership, we had $6 billion of investment, new investment in our state. Average incomes are up about 10% a year in 2020. Tate has done an incredible job. He's overseen record state investments in education and infrastructure and public safety, at the same time cutting taxes. And that's how Republicans, and that's how good Republican governors roll. And if we look over at Louisiana, it's got a Democrat governor the last 8 years, or even Kentucky, you know, that's what we would probably have gotten from a Brandon Presley. You can only imagine during COVID how Brandon Presley would have governed.
Well, and there's a couple of other points to this. One of the points is just physically putting a Democrat governor in a red state with Republican House and Senate majorities is like asking the Mississippi State University president to run Ole Miss or Ole Miss to run Mississippi State. You're not going to have a better system. I mean, it's just stupid. We've seen this before, not only in Mississippi but other places. And what happens is the Democrat governor spends all of their time building the Democrat Party by presenting outlandish things that he knows or she knows will never be accepted. But I'm going to give you this, I'm going to give you that, and then when it's rejected fiscally by the House and Senate, those evil people won't give you this. It's almost like a divorce needed between two rivaling spouses.
Well, there's no question that Brandon Presley would work against the conservative members in the state House and the state Senate, who have overwhelming majority Republicans in the Mississippi House and Senate. And so we wouldn't get much accomplished. And I think we have gotten a lot accomplished under Governor Reeves, even though there are days when he and the Lieutenant Governor Speaker, disagree on things. I mean, that's okay. To disagree on minor things. It's the big things we got to get right. Education and jobs and health care. But Brandon Presley, Paul, it wants to campaign like he's a moderate, but you notice when he's out doing his fundraising, it's all liberals giving money.
It's good old boy stuff too, and I've had him on the air many, many years. And I've always asked him, why are you still a Democrat? And then it was like the last 3 or 4 different, and maybe he knew this was coming. I'm sure he did. He was going to run. It was almost like, he was closer and closer embracing the tenets and the platform of the Democrat Party. He didn't leave it because he still believes in what the Democrats believe in. You cannot dissect yourself from that.
Yeah, he's not a moderate. I'm glad he's pro-life, and I'm glad for that. But overall, he's not a moderate. And COVID to me is like the great exposure of how mayors and governors actually really govern and what they did in COVID. Did they restrict freedom, or did they try to protect, making sure our schools and our jobs and our churches were open? Because, if Mississippi had a Democrat governor like Louisiana, our kids would have been out of school much, much longer, and they would have suffered for that. And that's what's happened with kids in big cities in places like New York and Washington D.C. and California.
Let me tell you something else, and I'm not, it's just to me, it seems like most of this is being run from out of state. And the reason I say that is because they seem to be so out of touch. And I hear from some people who were Brandon fans, probably as far as his Public Service Commission duties, and they're really disappointed in this. And they voice the same thing. This doesn't sound like it's coming from him. I said, well, he's never run for governor before, number one. Number two is, if it is coming from these people, because you're attacking, number one, the TANF of the Mississippi Department of Human Services thing. It's already been cleared up, but even though you've been given that information and you know that information, you harp on it because, as you said, you cannot attack his real record.
That's right, and I don't think he can run on the issues that he wants to run on. And so, what does that leave him with? Well, let me attack him on something that happened when he wasn't even governor, and that Tate Reeves has nothing to do with. And I think it just shows that nothing is off limits with Brandon Presley. I'm not sure that we can trust him, and I'm disappointed. Because I've met Brandon Presley, several times over the years, and he always struck me as a nice guy. And I have no doubt that he's a nice guy, and I'm sure he means well for Mississippi. But the fact that his campaign seems to me to be so left-leaning and so out of touch with Mississippians, something doesn't add up with who I thought Brandon Presley was, and maybe that's because there are a bunch of people from out of state that have a heavy influence, or maybe he was more left-leaning than I ever knew. But I expected more from his campaign. But I tell you what, one thing voters need to know, it's been nasty. It's going to get nastier because Presley he's gained some ground with these negative attacks, and he's kind of bolstered, I think, probably his Democrat base. That's right. And it's why Tate attacks him right back to drive up Brandon Presley's unfavorables, and I have no doubt that they have, because there are certain issues when people find out that Brandon Presley has a stance related to kids under 18.
Why haven't we heard more about these contributions? Because they seem to be unethical and, at the least, maybe even illegal. The contributions from people that he was to vote on, as far as solar and things such as that. Why haven't we heard more about that?
I don't know. I really don't know. But I can tell you this: If you want the state to continue to move where we're strong on jobs, we're strong on freedom, we're moving in a good, positive direction on education, you better turn out and vote for Tate Reeves.
Isn't that the 600-pound gorilla in the room, though? It's just getting people out. Because
Turnout is going to be critical.
I don't know how you do it. How do you do that?
Yeah, I will say the way that we end up with a liberal governor is that Republicans assume that we win. And I'm talking to you voters on the Gulf Coast of Mississippi, where Tate has a strong support. And the voters down there get it. But we got to run the score up down there, because there are going to be other parts of the state, like where I'm from in the Delta, where Brandon Presley's going to run the score up. And so we need big turnout. We need people to get fired up. We need people to lean on their neighbors, their friends. The best way to get somebody to vote is not a TV ad or even a radio ad, heaven forbid, Paul. It's peer-to-peer. It's person talking to somebody that they know, their neighbor, and encouraging them that, hey, we've got to run because this is important. It's about the future of our state and our children.
And again, I always put this in here, this disclaimer. We are talking to the choir here because this audience across the state is the most likely to vote as far as talk radio, and we know that through survey after survey. But again, doesn't stop people from getting out there and talking to their neighbors, number one.
Amen.
The biggest news that the Brandon Presley people have broke is that Tate Reeves planted a lemon tree. Is that
I don't know anything about a lemon tree, but I do know this: if Brandon Presley's a governor, we're going to have worse than a lemon.
Very good connection there. And the other thing was that he fixed some cracks in the 1842 mansion with taxpayers' money. That's why I say they seem to be so out of touch. You wonder if, other than the Jonathans of this state, and that's a whole other ballgame, I found a word that works with this whole policy and with the demeanor of these people. Stank. It's some kind of stank. Thank you, man. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you, brother.
Henry